But guess who's still on the air? Me. Me. And I'm sitting in a $300 million paid-for building. Neck deep in cash, you jerks. Bring it.
That's a rant from Dave Ramsey from June 2021. One of his longtime sponsors was in a legal battle, and a spotlight had turned on Dave and his endorsement of Timeshare Exit Team. Well, in April of 2023, some fans of Dave that trusted his endorsement answered that challenge to bring it. They brought a class action lawsuit and named Dave personally. We'll be talking about that on today's episode. I'm Amy Fritz, and you're listening to the Untangled Faith podcast, a podcast for anyone who has found themselves confused or disillusioned in their faith journey. If you want to hold on to your faith while untangling it from all that is not good or true, this is the place for you. Last week, while my friend and good friend of the podcast, Melissa Hogan, was looking for updates on the ongoing lawsuits regarding Ramsey Solutions, she stumbled across a brand new lawsuit that named Ramsey Solutions. It also named Dave Ramsey personally. Melissa was the very first to write up an article and break that news. Religion journalist Bob Smetana wrote up an article shortly after for the Religion News Service. Since then, I have lost count of the number of outlets that have reported on this lawsuit. Melissa joins me on this episode to explain the ins and outs of this lawsuit. If you're interested in having access to all the information I've collated about Ramsey in one place that points to podcasts, articles, employee reviews, and more, go to untangledfaithpodcast.com and click on the blue sign up button on the middle of the page. All right, let's get into this episode. Well, I have Melissa Hogan back on the podcast today, and that generally means that we have an update that my lawyer friend can explain. You guys that have been listening for a while know that Melissa has been a lawyer for over 2 decades, 25 years or more.
Yeah.
And just this week, we found out there is a new lawsuit that involves Ramsey Solutions, and it's a big, huge deal. So I wanted Melissa to come on and give us an explanation of what is happening, because you all aren't lawyers.
And I mean, it's a fascinating situation and legal theory and kind of case that many people both are and aren't familiar with, and that is a class action suit. So I actually did get a question on Instagram yesterday, and I'll start with answering that. And
let's start with that.
How did you find out about this case? How do you find out about these cases before other people find out about them? And as you know, Amy, it's kind of a funny story because I write about these Ramsey Solutions cases, hopefully in layman's terms, and provide links to some of the documents so people can get a context for what's happening. And part of why I do that is because Ramsey is so focused on people not knowing about these things. And, you know, I'm very passionate about access to courts, access to justice. And how you do some of that is to give people access to what's actually happening in the courts, because not everybody can, you know, even go into the courtroom locally or have the time or the understanding to do that. So really, access on the internet has been huge for access to justice and access to courts. So you can access lots of files from lots of different courts on the internet, but the easiest is with the federal court system. And there's a system called PACER that you have to register and create an account for, but it's not just for lawyers. Other people can do that. And you can search for different types of cases. So, and you can monitor them and put them in your saved cases. And you do get charged for what you download and print, but there's a threshold every month that if you're below that, they don't actually charge you for it. So that's good. And so a lot of people, if they're just looking at a bunch of different cases, are not even going to end up having to pay overall for that. I bump over that, you know, not infrequently.
Yeah.
But so I look for Ramsey Solutions cases every so often. I monitor the ones that are there that I'm writing about, and you can search. And so I search nationwide in the federal court system and did that the other night. I do that periodically. And saw this new case. And I thought, well, have I seen that before? because I searched locally as well. There was a new case where actually Ramsey Solutions had sued somebody to collect on a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, was it that? And pulled it up and looked at it and was immediately blown away. No, it was not that. It was a class action lawsuit.
And you could see the date was relatively recent too, that had been
Yes.
filed.
Yes. It was filed in April. And then, you file the complaint, you have to serve people and different things. So really that's all that's happened in that case so far is the filing the complaint, and then the attorneys make their appearance. So these attorneys are representing the plaintiffs, and then Ramsey has entered, their attorneys who are going to represent them.
So does it help that you happen to know that Ramsey goes by different names? Like they have a legal entity and they do business under another name. Do you search several different names?
Yes, it can get technical sometimes in the search strings. In some cases they are Lampo Group, the, and in some cases they are the Lampo Group, or, just Lampo Group or Ramsey Solutions, or, David L. Ramsey the third. And so searching all of those, kind of covers all the bases.
Now, what's interesting about this one is that Dave himself is named personally as a defendant in this.
Yes.
Now, I can't imagine a case where they would have named him, but not the company. But if you weren't looking for Dave's name and they had only named him, it might not have popped up.
Right, right. The other cases that we've talked about and that I write about have not sued Dave personally. There is one exception, and that is the Amos case. And it's an employment case, but also names Dave personally for a number of different theories under there. So that's different than the basis for that. It's similar, but in this case, it was Dave himself who was making these representations. And we'll get into that more specifically, but
let's talk about, this is really interesting because people don't know, like we have been aware that something had happened with this advertiser or sponsor of the Ramsey show that Dave had promoted extensively, Timeshare Exit Team. That was what they did business under. Legally, Reed Hind, is that the name of it?
Reed Hine.
Reed Hine. And this it was even on like national, like Inside Edition about 2 or 3 years ago now. I don't remember. I think it was 2020 maybe. So it might have been
it was 2021.
Oh yeah, 2021. That's right. Because I remember and it was like summertime. It was actually around this very same time of year, because the footage in there was Lisa Guerrero trying to get a statement from Dave while he was at the EntreLeadership Summit, which actually happens every year this time of year. It's happened this weekend, happened this last week. And it was in Nashville this year, but at the time it was in Dallas. And so part of that was her trying to get a statement from him. So it's just crazy that it's been almost exactly 2 years. And at the time you had some theories like maybe something else would come of this. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. I discussed this actual type of case, that this is what could happen. And based on the statements that were being made by the Washington Attorney General in that case, I really thought that this was a possibility.
So 2 years ago, what was happening 2 years ago that came in the news? I guess maybe I should rewind to that.
So as background, there was a sponsor, an advertiser at Ramsey Solutions on the radio show, the podcasts. It seems like on their website, possibly in print materials, at events, called Timeshare Exit Team. And if people aren't familiar, timeshares are where people pay money and they get kind of certain weeks of vacation or certain points, but then they also have to pay a fee each year to use that. And the theory goes that fee is generally less than what it would cost you to rent out a place like that, because you're paying a bunch of money up front.
Yeah.
But it's still a not insignificant fee.
Yeah.
And there's generally high pressure sales tactics that are used when people buy those and they're on a trip. And there's been a lot of exposure about the unsavory things that happen and can happen in the timeshare industry to get people involved in those. So a lot of people have regret afterwards, or they don't use it. They didn't understand how to use it. And so they want to get out of that contract. So then they're developed a whole other industry called timeshare exit programs or companies. And so this company, Reed Hine, which I believe is a combination of the names of the two founders, they, according to court documents, were gutter salesmen, and they saw long lines at timeshare tables or timeshare exit tables, I'm not sure, and they decided to get into the timeshare exit business. So they developed this company called Timeshare Exit Team. It sounds like they were chugging along, and then at some point they got connected to Ramsey Solutions, went on his radio show, and then they became a sponsor and developed some deal with Ramsey Solutions. And that's part of what interests me as well, because I was a business attorney for many years. And so I kind of know what should have gone into a deal like that would generate that type of cash and that type of exposure, and what type of due diligence and work and research and effort and contractual provisions should go into a deal like that.
Yeah. So
now, whether they did, that's the question.
So as an onlooker, or an on listener, if somebody had been listening to the show, maybe starting in around 2016-ish until 2020, 21, you would have probably often heard references to Timeshare Exit Team.
Yes.
I heard Dave say, talk about them, and I heard them promoted on the show. These are the people that can help you get out of your timeshares. And in 2021, we found out that the state of Washington, is that right, was going after Timeshare Exit Team, alleging that they were not getting people out of their timeshares. Does that sound right?
Correct. And the interesting part is Dave Ramsey railed so much about how timeshares were a scam and how they took your money and how they, wouldn't let you out of the contract. And these are literally the exact same patterns that Timeshare Exit Team was then accused of doing, and that the plaintiffs now have alleged that they did. So the Washington State Attorney General filed a Consumer Protection Act case against them in 2021, but that was after a number of other cases, both from timeshare companies and from clients of Timeshare Exit Team, had sued them and alleged that they're engaging in these practices.
Yeah, they were taking money from people, and they were not getting what they thought they were supposed to be getting out of Timeshare Exit Team.
Right. And they wouldn't give them, they suppose one of the big things that was in the advertisement, all the advertisements on the Ramsey website and, podcast, was they have a money back guarantee. And so, give them your money, because if they don't do it, you are going to get your money back. And so that was a lot of the allegations as well, is that no, they were telling people, you have to go through this for 3 years, and all these stipulations have to have occurred before you get your money back. And most people were not getting their money back, is at least what's been alleged. So the Washington Attorney General brought this Consumer Protection Act case, and it proceeded along, and discovery occurred. And at one point they wanted to depose Dave Ramsey, which, if people aren't familiar, a deposition, as you and I both know, because we were deposed by Ramsey Solutions. They wanted to, so a deposition is where, it's kind of like when you see someone on a stand and people are asking them questions, but it's what happens well before that in order to discover a lot of the information and to find out what you're going to say and what your responses are to these questions.
Yeah. And you're under oath.
Yes, you're under oath. So you can be commit perjury and, be charged with that if you lie, and that's proven later on. So they were prepared to depose Dave. It had been ordered by actually a local Williamson County judge. They had to go through a subpoena here locally that, yes, he should submit to a deposition. And that's happened a couple other times. He really does not want to be deposed.
Yeah.
And what happened after that, he was ordered to be deposed, and the case settled via consent decree within a couple weeks thereafter.
And so before he ended up being deposed.
At least as far as we know.
Okay.
And so I always had a little theory about that's really the timing of that is very interesting.
Yeah.
And so that was settled, and they were ordered to pay. Timeshare Exit Team was ordered to pay a certain amount of money to retract a lot of these statements that they had made. And, a bunch of stipulations. And one of the questions I had was, Dave had also engaged in a number of statements about what was happening. And I thought, well, I wonder if they're going to order him to also, he at one point alleged, suggested that the Washington Attorney General had taken a bribe, basically.
Yeah.
And that they were in bed with the timeshare industry and all of these things that were pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, that video is still up on YouTube.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, the timeshare industry is full of crooks, full of people that are doing sketchy things. But just because that is true doesn't mean that it can't also be true that the people that are claiming to be the ones to get you out of those, it could also be true that they are also crooks and they're also taking advantage of people. So both of these things. So saying that the Timeshare Exit Team was engaging in allegedly shady things, and it seems like proven by the Washington State Attorney General, at least whatever their legal case was there, that was happening on their side as well. It was not, they were crooks too. They were taking advantage of people that were very vulnerable and had already been taken advantage of.
I mean, it makes it even worse.
It does.
To say, because, and here's the thing that Dave seemed to engage in that type of video, which is very black and white thinking, which if you're familiar with unhealthy situations and narcissism, things like that, black and white thinking is very common, like good guy, bad guy.
Yeah.
And so timeshare
industry
was the bad guys.
Yeah. And it's because they're the bad guy, the Timeshare Exit Team must be the good guys. Right.
Which we know both can be true. They can both be bad guys.
Yeah.
There's bad guys all around in this situation.
And they got some people out, allegedly. I think some people got out of their timeshares, but it sounds like the majority of people were left languishing, continuing to be billed. It was not what they thought. The service they thought they were getting is not what they got. And so when this all happened and got settled with Washington State, you started to surmise, I wonder if something else will come of it that impacts Dave.
Well, there were statements made by the Washington Attorney General about, especially in the motion to compel Dave to submit to a deposition, that, his endorsement of them and, what they said about them was an instrumentality of their ability to commit fraud. Mm. And, there were just a couple quotes where I said, this is not a leap that because these aggrieved plaintiffs are not going to get all that money back from Reed Hine or Timeshare Exit Team. Yeah. There's just too much missing money, and Timeshare Exit Team paid Ramsey Solutions a lot of money to do those endorsements and advertisements. And it is not a leap when I see these statements about what caused what, or the issue of causation for these plaintiffs to then and their attorneys, very smartly seek to go after Ramsey Solutions for that money.
2 years ago, it was really compelling to hear those voices on Inside Edition talking about how they had been loyal listeners of the Dave Ramsey show, and they trusted Dave. And
these are not upset. I think we're often called, upset ex-employees, disgruntled ex-spouses.
These are super fans.
These were super fans. They had and this is all in the complaint for this class action suit. They had his books. Some went to events, went through Financial Peace at their church. listened to the radio show and the podcast. These were like invested fans, and clearly so, because they took his endorsement and paid, some between $4,000. One of the named plaintiffs in the class action paid over $40,000 to Timeshare Exit Team.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So this spring, was it in April when this class action was filed?
Yes.
You just discovered it this last week, and you weren't surprised.
No, I mean,
the timing surprised you.
Yes, I would have expected it to happen sooner because I could kind of see the writing on it, when that actually happened in 2021, and then that settled and nothing had gone on. And so I would have expected it to happen sooner. So 2 years later, I'm sitting here and searching for cases, and all of a sudden, stumble upon this case. Like, this is the thing. This is it. It's here. And it is a very well written complaint. As an attorney myself and as a writer, I can be critical sometimes of other attorneys' work, especially like how they write and support their case with, allegations and evidence.
So what do you see in this as the strengths of this filing and the lawyer work here?
Well, backing up, how class actions work, and I'm not a class action attorney, obviously, but I have a general understanding as an attorney, and I worked as a clerk on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. So we, looked at and researched and listened to argument and wrote opinions on lots of different types of cases, including class actions. So how it works is there are named plaintiffs in a class action, and they represent all the types of people who might have been injured in that similar way. So for something to be a class action and to be certified, which would be the next step that we're looking at, it has to have claims that would require similar proof. So similar circumstances, and then the defenses of the defendant or multiple defendants would be similar for, most of these types of people. So if a fact pattern is very factually intense and dependent, like, they said this statement to me and they may not have said that to other people, or they did this, it's harder to have a class action case for that because everybody's individual situation would be different. But if, there's certain criteria to look at that the court will look at as to whether or not to certify this. And some of those are like this, similar fact patterns and claims, similar defenses, that it would be in situations for class actions. It's usually a situation where the claimant the amount for any individual person is small enough that it's not really fruitful to go after that small amount. And so you really have to bring all the people together to make, it worthwhile for attorneys and for the people to actually go after that money. And so, would someone sue Dave Ramsey, a multi-millionaire with lots of power and influence, for $5,000? No, they're not going to. But if you had 10,000 people who each, had lost $5,000, that's generally when you're looking at a class action. So so one of the strengths was that the different people that they had in here did represent some of the different slices and flavors of people who would have been aggrieved by Timeshare Exit Team. There's some different amounts of money. All of these people got their endorsement, and it seems how they heard about it was from Dave. And that's why they did it, is that they trusted him. They seem very salt of the earth people. So the complaint does a good job of humanizing those plaintiffs. We have long haul truck drivers. We have a medical technologist. We have people who, plant their garden while they listen to Dave Ramsey. And so it does a good job of humanizing them and then connecting that to why they trusted him and, how they were then harmed and, the theories of the case. So it was very well organized and did a great job of humanizing the people.
Yeah, I read over it a little bit myself, not all of it. And I thought, wow, like this isn't like it was interesting to read and not just a bunch of legal words that I didn't understand. I'm like, all these are real people, real jobs that spent a lot of time listening to Dave and trusted him. So I want to ask you, you had alluded to this earlier. I mean, a lot of people have endorsements on their shows, their YouTube channels, or run commercials. What is the problem with that? What kind of liability is there for the person that that takes that endorsement? Um, what is your understanding of what kind of is standard and what broke down here?
So there's a couple unique aspects to this case that it will probably turn on.
Yeah.
The first question will be, what did they actually know or should they have known?
Yeah.
So looking at the contract and what due diligence. So due diligence in a business deal is the research that you do to be assured that you're getting what you're paying for and that they are who they say they are. And so, what did they do in this? Did they do even basic looking to see whether this company could do and was doing what they said they were doing?
Yeah.
Had the ability to, that it was legal or illegal. So one of the allegations is that some of the statements on their website were not true. And so, did Ramsey know that actively, or should they have known that? And then as the investigation started happening and these allegations were being made that, hey, they're committing, fraud or, lying about what they're doing, they're not qualified, all these different things. Did Ramsey know that, or should they have known that? And then also in the style of Dave's endorsement, there's two parts of that. One, I believe I remember he said things like, I personally endorse them.
Yeah.
I trust them. So, later on, he'll probably want to say, well, that was the company, or that was in my capacity as a personality or an employee. But Dave fills a lot of roles at that company. And so using words like that is, that can be very problematic. Another aspect is whether they disclosed certain things as part of that endorsement. There's certain requirements, whether it's from the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, or other places, about when you receive money. And you may have seen things on TV commercials like so and so is a paid endorsement, or they are an actor portraying a story. So there's certain those it's not because people want to tell you that, they're required to tell you those kinds of things. So did Ramsey and Dave personally comply with the requirements? And so sometimes there can be a theory where if you don't comply with certain requirements, that that is then a de facto, which means almost like automatic problem.
Yeah. Well, and it means you're exposed, you have more liability and exposure.
Right.
FTC has gotten involved because they had seen problems in the past where people had been harmed because they weren't careful with what they had said. And so this is meant to protect the consumer, but it could also protect the business or the entity or the person that is saying, hey, this person is sponsoring the show, and even saying sponsoring the show probably came from some FTC filing at some point where people were like, why does Melissa always randomly talk about how much she loves this, XYZ thing? But she never ever said that she got paid all these to say that. And so this is why you always hear brought to you by or a sponsor of, and companies often will give you a script or they'll want to preview what the person is saying, so they can say, oh yeah, that's actually true. You're representing what we have agreed to in our contract, and the liability for us is taken care of, and they're going to assume that you are taking care of your own liability as well.
Right. Usually both sides of that kind of transaction have attorneys
Yeah.
who review, and people can rail about attorneys all they want. Yes. We, can slow things down. It can be bureaucratic, but they usually review those things to make sure they're each complying with their legal obligations.
Yeah.
So, for example, in one of the famous cases, Elizabeth Holmes,
Mhm.
was convicted of lots of different crimes recently related to a blood testing company that she had started. And if you listen to podcasts or read books about that, she wanted to say a lot of things about what she thought her technology could do, and most of which we now know are not true. But people within her company, and then also people within the advertising and marketing company that was going to be putting that out there, had people reviewing those statements to make sure that they had a legitimate basis and that they had the proof in the file that those statements that would support those statements. So that will be a question, in here is, what proof did we have for these? What things to support? Even was an examination even done?
Yeah.
Were there attorneys looking at any of this stuff?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very interesting case to watch.
Yeah. People who have been followers of Dave know that he often promotes and has like his Ramsey approved financial coach, or talk to one of our Smart Vestor pros. I think, do they have those? And they talk about the Ramsey Trusted, where you reach out to the Ramsey Trusted part of the organization, and they will connect you to people that the Ramsey organization endorses. And so I think this brings up a really interesting question: is what does it mean to be endorsed? What does it mean to have the Ramsey endorsement? Dave personally saying he endorses them, or the company saying that they endorse them? Is that specifically delineated anywhere for everybody to understand what that means? As a consumer, what is their understanding? Is their understanding that they have that these companies and people have been vetted by Dave and or the company themselves? And so, I mean, there are a couple options here of what happened with the Timeshare Exit Team. And one is Dave or whomever was in charge did the vetting, and it was they didn't see anything. Or they just were like, hey, this is a great opportunity for all of us. Let's sign on it. Or they did the vetting initially, and then later on they just sort of were hands off and didn't pay any attention. Now, it's my understanding there are allegations that after that endorsement started, people had reached out to the company and said they were having trouble with their relationship with Timeshare Exit Team. They were not being served. These are allegations that I've heard. I'm sure they will be addressed in the lawsuit. And so what happens then? What kind of responsibility? I mean, and the complaint, and that initial filing has this timeline listed that said, while these concerns were being raised about Timeshare Exit Team, Dave was endorsing them for money. While this was burning down, Dave was endorsing them for money. And then while this was happening, Dave was endorsing them for money. And all these things
very effective
were different levels of how easy you could see they were happening.
Well, and one of the things the complaint doesn't talk about, and it's not, there's a reason that they wouldn't talk about this there, but at least you and I have previously talked about this, is this seems to possibly be part of a pattern. So years ago, we had looked at the ELP program, and which is now called, I think, Ramsey Trusted. Mm-hmm. And people did not seem to realize that, one, it's not clear that these people were actually vetted in any significant way. Although they said, these are the people we trust. Mm-hmm. These are, the heart of a teacher. And there didn't seem to be any standards for those actual things or any investigation into those actual things. And then there also didn't seem to be disclosure to the people that if you are giving us your name and we're giving it to these people, we are getting paid for that. We are getting paid to give your name to them, and or we are being paid a portion of what you might be paying them in the back end. And that is on the realtor side.
Yeah.
This was not there. I never saw any disclosure on the website related to the realtor transactions, that we then learned that the real estate agents were having to pay a percentage of their transactions that they closed that were referred to them by Ramsey Solutions back to Ramsey Solutions. And at least my understanding is that the way that worked was because Dave had his real estate license, and that was essentially kind of a fee split. Again, I'm getting into territory that is not my area of law, but this is my understanding of what happened. And really, some of that only came to light because of an earlier case, the Paffrath case, where a real estate agent in California who had a YouTube channel entered into that program and realized there were
He infiltrated
and realized there were a number of these significant problems. And then he did YouTube videos about it and revealed a lot of this. And other people, and it was
taken down.
Yeah, they've been taken down. I think they settled a deal. Yeah, Ramsey actually sued him, got an ex parte restraining order, which is like outside of him even being involved. They went to a judge. The judge said, I'm going to restrain him from speaking about any of this stuff. And then they slapped him with that. And he actually, I think he showed the cease and desist letter on his YouTube channel, which was fascinating.
I remember seeing that. I remember seeing that like right that week, that like November of 2018.
That was as my stuff was all going down, that was happening.
Yeah.
And it was this crazy situation because people had never talked publicly about the fact that these real estate agents, if they get the name from Ramsey Solutions, they are then having to essentially kick back a portion, as real estate agents generally get, there's a 6% total on a transaction that's usually split between, the buyer and the seller's agent. They each get 3%. And then they're having to kick back a not insignificant portion of that to Ramsey Solutions. And that had never been talked about publicly.
Yeah.
And I never saw any disclosures related to that on the website or in any public information or places where you would enter your name looking for a real estate agent on the Ramsey Solutions website.
I'm not sure what I could say. My husband worked in the endorsed local provider area, so I will let you speak to your thoughts on that. But I would say, anybody could go and look on the Dave Ramsey website to see the sort of business, like what is public out there about who he endorses and how you get connected with those people, and then ask some questions. How do you think it works? Who's benefiting? And I think there are a lot of assumptions out there that I don't know if people really know how it works. So I think it's worth asking the questions, and it is relevant to this discussion of like, what does it mean to have that endorsement, and what is a reasonable assumption of your typical person who's listening to Dave, like an average person who isn't spending a lot of time thinking about how this works. They're just thinking, I hear this person, they say they endorse this person, this is what I hear, and this is how I'm moving forward with this assumption based on the information that was given. So,
and that's different than that's different than just like an advertiser. Like if you have a TV show, the commercial comes on, it's an advertiser. That they're trying to sell you something. So when the lines really get blurred about, when the personality is, endorsing that person or that product person comes on the air as a guest on the show, and it's not clear that, that there's a money exchange happening there, that's where it can get problematic.
Yeah. And Dave's own studio is named after, I'm assuming a sponsor. Does he say it's sponsored or brought to you from the dollar car rental studio? It's no longer that. They must not be giving money to Dave anymore. Now it is like the Pods Moving and Storage Studio. And so that the name of the studio seems to be for sale as an advertising thing. I don't know. It's really interesting. Like, I don't know if I'm a typical person because, of having a lot of information from, being so close to the situation there of what a typical person would think when they hear that and see that. So I think those arguments will be made in the class action of what should these people have understood and what would they have no way, what wouldn't have been a reasonable thing for them. Here is an argument that I heard 2 years ago when Dave was saying timeshare exit, the timeshare industry is terrible. This is just the timeshare company, flexing, and this isn't really that the timeshare exit team is bad. I remember him saying they just grew too fast. We sent them too many customers, and then they couldn't keep up.
The problem was they were so successful that two things happened. One is they're two young guys running a business, and it's hard to scale a business that fast, and they got where they weren't returning calls that great, so we're jumping on them because we're hearing complaints because timeshare won't call us back from the customer. That's not okay, and it was just because of sheer volume of business.
That sheer volume of business excuse fails to take into account that if they were too swamped to serve all the people who came to them for help, why did Timeshare Exit Team continue to take money from new customers? I'd love to hear Dave explain why that was okay. That's the argument. I actually even saw somebody push back with that online this week when somebody shared one of the articles that came out this week. Somebody was like, well, what happened was they just couldn't keep up with all the business that Dave sent them. That was what the real problem was.
Well, and there's a couple problems with that. One, the intent or the reason generally doesn't matter in the face of the facts. If they didn't provide what they contracted to provide to these people, it doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
They didn't provide a contract. There's not really like a I had a good excuse, unless there's actual excuses in the contract. It's like, you're paying me this money, I'm going to do this. And, it doesn't matter if, they had all this other business and they didn't have enough time and, et cetera.
It was an interesting argument to make because I didn't understand why Dave would even be worried about defending Timeshare Exit Team at this point. I would have thought by that point, things are on fire. He should have been saying more smart things to protect himself and the company.
If I was his lawyer, and thankfully I'm not, but
yes,
I know his lawyers, and there are so many points over the last 3 years that I would have been having a heart attack, and I would have wanted to muzzle him and explain to him how he is damaging his own case. This is what we find, right? That people it's hubris, and people who are arrogant and unhealthy end up outing themselves because they just cannot keep their mouth shut. And the idea that Dave, in the middle of all of this 2 years ago, said, that the statement he said was that, when we endorsed them, their business exploded.
To say that their business exploded when I came on the air and told people Timeshare Exit Team will get you out is an understatement. Their business skyrocketed over the next few years.
Literally, that is like exhibit A
of why he should have
the connection to the causation in this case.
Why there should be some liability.
I heard that and was like, oh my gosh, if I was his lawyer, I would be dying. And I think I actually wrote that in the article on Medium that I wrote about this case. I would have died if I was his lawyer after that statement. And then he goes on to say, come at me. I'm sitting in a 30, or a $300 million paid for building. And
he said.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I really do feel bad for his lawyers, because when you have a client like that, I mean, it's no different than having Donald Trump as a client.
Yeah.
You cannot control them. They don't want to be controlled because they want to control things. And they just, unless you can control them and get them to realize that they are shooting themselves in the foot, your job is so incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dave's going to be like, somebody's going to listen to this podcast and they're going to be like, Melissa's not telling the truth. She doesn't know these lawyers. She knows lawyers that work for Dave. As
Yes.
far as I know, you do not know who he hired to be the class action lawsuit.
No, it's a larger firm, as it should be. I mean,
yeah. But you have known his general counsel. I mean, you used to work at the same place as general counsel worked at, and
every day we actually were in the same department, saw each other every day, worked together on deals. Yeah. His outside lawyer in that case, we went to college, small college together, also worked together at the same firm. So it's this very weird dynamic. And those were the two lawyers that questioned us when we were deposed by Ramsey Solutions. Yeah. It was very bizarre.
It was like to know that you had some sort of like, you know them, they know you.
Yeah. It's crazy. And it was really weird because I wanted to be like, are we not going to talk about the elephant in the room here? But I feel for them as attorneys that they are in a very difficult situation.
And a lawyer with integrity will do their very best to defend their client to the best of their ability under their legal obligations and their ethical obligations. And so there is no shame in that. Now there is shame in being in different tactics, I would say.
Yes.
You don't have to be an intimidating jerk.
No, I mean, I think there's certain tactics that they use, like the cease and desist letter that you
question
our other friends,
the tone.
It did not need to be that way.
Yeah.
And then also the attorney that Ramsey used when I subpoenaed things from them in my divorce, blatantly lied to the judge. Now, do I think Ramsey probably lied to him and he may not have known he was lying to the judge? Mm-hmm. We can slice that a lot of ways, but there was, significant deception in court, like in the actual case.
All right. So I have to say this because yes, the lawyer world is small. And I'm assuming there will be discussion about how Amy and Melissa are, coming after the company. And are you part of some plan where you have been like, you made this lawsuit happen?
No, I don't know.
I just want to ask the attorney.
I don't know the attorneys in this case. I have never spoken to them or emailed with them as far as I know. So I do not know them. But I think any good attorney would have read a couple things from the case in 2021 and said, oh, this is a theory of a new case. I mean, you don't have to be a stellar attorney to have read that and go, oh, well, my next step would be there'd be a class action suit against Ramsey Solutions. I thought that in 2021.
Yeah. Well, and the person and the lawyer that was on Inside Edition, one of them that was speaking about the case, he is involved in this lawsuit. So it sounds like before we even knew about any of this stuff happening, there was a lawyer walking with individuals had been impacted by Timeshare Exit Team for several years. So I just wanted to ask that. In case the theory is that I am the mastermind behind this, I have nothing to do with this.
We are fascinating.
Yes, it is fascinating.
We think it's fascinating. And I have said this many times, like I look at situations like this, especially when you look at the faith context. And, when I was in my situation with Ramsey Solutions and, they sought to intimidate and control and, put me under a gag order and all of these things, I pleaded and cried with God to see my situation and do something. And I would have never imagined that it would play out. I would have never imagined that they would have the hubris to fire a woman who was pregnant while they were still covering up the situation with my now ex-husband. And, things just slowly keep being revealed. And I've said a lot, I feel like I'm in the stands. I'm watching God in the arena play out this justice that, I have cried out for. And not justice for me even necessarily, justice for the people who have been harmed collectively by their choices, just as for the deception that is happening for how the Christian faith is being portrayed in that context, and the control of people and their voice. And, one of the things we haven't talked about on here, but I've written about and you've spoken about, is the fact that our understanding is now that all the employees at Ramsey Solutions are under a non-disparagement and in some ways non-disclosure agreement. They're under forced arbitration, so they can't ever sue the company for any employment things, or and they can't leave and compete or solicit anybody. I mean, these are extreme measures to control the employees that work at your company that you are calling family and that you say you care about and share the same faith. I mean, these are very extreme controlling tactics that are very abnormal. And so, I care about these people, many of whom don't even realize they're being controlled in very unhealthy ways.
Yeah, I have so much empathy for those. There are a lot of people with good character that work at Ramsey as well. I mean, there's people that have no character, bad character that work there. But I would say there's a really good percentage of people that just really thought they were getting involved in a good mission and are good people. And some of those people are unaware. Some of them are becoming aware and they feel sick about it and they just don't know what they can do. Especially now that they have signed away a lot of things that they don't even understand. So I feel for them. Like if my husband were still there, how sick to my stomach would I be right now? I would be so sick to my stomach, like stuck and unsure what to do.
But the reality is when we see this done, when we see this level of control like continue to be clamped down further and further. So for example, like in the Harvey Weinstein case where they used NDAs to silence people for many, many years about allegations, you don't need NDAs unless you have something to hide and keep quiet. And so as much as I hate all of what is happening to people, the more that's clamped down, the more people will feel that that's what's happening and realize that's what's happening. And, in the end, these things bust wide open. People break their NDAs because there's a groundswell of realization of what has been happening to them. And when people also think, nobody will talk or nobody will tell, the disgusting stuff that is happening gets worse and worse. And again, at some point, God will allow it to all expose itself. And I'm fully confident in that.
If you were to surmise what you would think Ramsey would be attempting to do or communicate next, what do you expect to see from them?
There's the if they're smart, if they're not smart.
Let's just say if they're what they have done in the past, if they follow the same pattern of what we've seen.
I think they will work hard to ignore, what's going on in the press, or and hopefully keep their employees quiet. And what happens is when they constantly psychologically manipulate people to not take in outside information, then the only place they're getting information is internally. And so they're going to spin the narrative internally. This is persecution. This is lies. This is normal business practices, which, we've already been through the different ways that this is abnormal, and potentially even more so depending on, the specific facts. So that's what I expect, is an internal narrative spin, more control, and quiet publicly is probably what I'm expecting.
And privately, and then, internally telling people they're being persecuted for the sake of, because they're trying to follow Jesus and honor Jesus. This is a
and then we're still and then we're still waiting on these other cases, in the O'Connor case, which, if people are familiar, that the employee who got pregnant and was fired, we're still waiting for a trial date for that and a ruling on
Summary judgment.
on a summary judgment motion.
Mhm.
And then we have a trial date in the Amos case, which is in January 2024. And we're waiting on a ruling on a motion to dismiss in that case. So that should be coming out soon. And, there may be, additional discovery, I think, in the Amos case. And Dave is supposed to sit for a deposition by the end of June in that case as well.
Man, I was also thinking about what we saw in the way that Ramsey himself, or Ramsey surrogates, his lawyers, leadership there, worked with or against the other lawyers on other sides of lawsuits. And it seems like they are not opposed to nitpicking at things, wordsmithing. If the lawyers are not very extremely specific about what they're asking in discovery, Ramsey will intentionally, it seems.
Yeah, obfuscation is the word that I commonly use. The level of obfuscation and that went on in that case, and just and I think the great thing is that when people start challenging this, and it's exposed to to third parties, it's so validating when those third parties say, no, this is a problem and this is wrong and you can't do this. So like when a federal judge says, hey, you can't do that, that argument doesn't fly here. When somebody is so used to getting away with that and so used to controlling the narrative and bullying people into submission and into their position underneath them, it is great to have a federal judge who says, no, you can't do that. Now, one of the things that was really difficult for me in my situation with a local judge is because Ramsey Solutions is well known in our community as a Christian employer. A local judge, what seemed to happen is, when something is said, the local judge doesn't consider that they might be blatantly lied to. Because you have this impression of, well, this is a Christian company. And so you don't even, and I mean, that's even what happens personally. Like if you have never encountered people who in your life who are pathological liars, you don't expect that someone will look you in the eye and lie to you until you have experienced that at a deep level. And sadly, then it makes you suspicious for a long time. But, if you've never experienced that, you don't expect somebody to lie to you, much less if that's a Christian company or a Christian personality. And so, a local judge here in Williamson County struggles more to make room in their brain for the fact that they might be lied to by, Ramsey Solutions or their lawyers. Whereas a federal judge is a little more jaded. And that's not their instinct that they're being lied to.
They're a little bit more separated from the situation.
Right. And they can't be influenced in the same way that a local elected judge, might be, who runs possibly in some similar social circles as a lot of, or in my case, the judge actually represented them in private practice prior to becoming a judge. So, it's the federal court system and the transparency and the access to documents is a good check and balance. Sunlight is the best of disinfectants. And so
and now that
out into the open.
Now that we have so many different cases that have been playing out, this lawyer that is overseeing as a part of the class action with the plaintiffs can see all the ways that Ramsey has responded, obfuscated, stonewalled, you with your even with discovery with your divorce. That information is out there, right? That information is out there. You ask your lawyer and you put together some questions. They answered different questions than you asked. they quibbled about what certain words actually meant. Like, what does a file actually mean? I don't remember what the word was, but it was
right. What is a document?
ridiculous. Like if you have any documents, and they were like, well, what's the definition of a document? Like, that is the sort of thing you have to like list all the documents that could possibly exist.
Yeah.
So they can look at that. They can look at what's happening with O'Connor. They can look at the Amos case. They can look at the Paffrath case. They can see all these ways. And so this person has more information. And then, I mean, they're starting out in a really strong position. So I think it will be interesting to watch. Now, the wheels of justice do not move quickly.
No.
And when it comes to class action with lots and lots of people involved, what is your understanding about like timeline for this sort of thing?
Well, I mean, we look at the O'Connor case, and that's now been going on for years.
It was filed in the summer of 2020.
I think so. I think you're right. And so, it can be longer than that.
And that's one plaintiff.
Yeah. And most class actions are settled, but also most cases are settled, and settled earlier on. So often class actions are settled after the class is certified. So,
what does it mean to have a class certified?
So that's where, that'll be one of the first steps, in the case is they'll seek certification of the class. And that's where the judge looks at that criteria and says, okay, these plaintiffs are similar enough. These claims are similar enough. The defenses would be similar enough. And this is appropriate to be treated.
Okay. This fits what needs to be a class action.
Right. And so if it's certified, then that's where you see these advertisements. So there's two places where you might see those kinds of advertisements after it's certified and they're looking for additional plaintiffs, or after there's a proposed settlement where they say, you can file a claim against this settlement and get paid. So, that'll be probably the first fight is this, certification of the class, or there might even be a fight before then.
That is going to be just devastatingly, it's going to be a devastating blow to Dave and Ramsey Solutions. The fact that if this class gets certified, there's going to be lots and lots of things on the radio, maybe even places, networks that he has his own list, that his own show is on.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine
that there will be an advertisement or some sort of thing on there that says, if you have been a part of this, you may be eligible for to be a part of this class action. Like,
did you follow Dave Ramsey's advice to use Timeshare Exit Team to try to get out of your timeshare?
And even if it's not on like during his show, it'll be on, his listeners that listen to other
radio.
Places. It'll be, that's where they would have those things on there, and people are going to ask questions, and that information that is happening is going to be inescapable. And I don't know how Dave shuts that down before that happens. I would imagine he'd like to.
If you look at the calculations in the claim, so here I think there were 17 named plaintiffs that were theoretically representative, and they said that the class of plaintiffs could be 10,000 plaintiffs. So if you took 10,000 plaintiffs, if that's appropriate, and you said, the average plaintiff paid Timeshare Exit Team $5,000. Like I said, we had some in there that were 4,000 something, and some were up to 40,000. But let's say it was 5,000, and there were 10,000 plaintiffs. I believe that number is then 50 million. And one of the things they asked for was treble damages. So there's certain, criteria for when you would be able to achieve like triple damages. And so it says in there specifically treble damages, at least $150 million. And so this is why class action suits are often settled, because when you put that number of claimants, and this is part of why they have class actions, because again, nobody's going to sue Dave Ramsey, multimillionaire, and his company for $5,000 that they lost, even though that was a significant amount for many of these salt of the earth people who listened to Dave Ramsey for financial advice. But when you put them all together, and that's part of the check and balance on the system, that you keep companies accountable and keep them from doing stuff like this. If all they do this to one person, they could get away with it,
Yeah.
because who's going to, but when you put all these people together, then that's a big motivator.
Yeah. There's more power, in numbers. I don't think we have talked about this, but what does it mean that Dave is being personally named and not just the Lampo Group? That's the legal name of the company that is over the Dave Ramsey show, all the places that use that sponsor of the Timeshare Exit Team. What does it mean? Like, his name is on there by himself, not just the company.
Yes. So that would be personal liability of Dave personally, if that is successful. Now, there are a lot of ways in which wealthy people structure their life and assets in order to avoid paying for in some way being personally liable for something. And I'm sure Dave has worked at that. At some point you have to question the consistency with, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I don't, I'm going to make myself penniless and live in a multi-million-dollar house and own, a $300 million building, as he brags, but I'm going to structure myself in such a way to never pay out any kind of a claim. But he might be personally responsible and will, then they'd have to collect on that. But he serves a lot of roles at Ramsey Solutions. And that is, those lines are very blurry.
Yeah.
And as an attorney, I look at, how you hold someone personally responsible versus a corporate entity. And I feel pretty good that just based on, a lot of the intricacies that you and I know about how it functions there and things that have been said and done and where to find that information. I feel like that was a very well supported call on their part, that liability is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. The lines are very blurry.
Yes.
Dave likes to be involved in all the things. And this is where it's going to come back to hurt him.
Yeah.
His needing to have power and control in so many areas could open him up to much more liability in this.
Yeah. I mean, people like that end up outing themselves and exposing themselves, but they just can't help it.
Yeah. As I was preparing for this episode, I listened to clips from episodes in which Dave mentioned the Timeshare Exit Team situation, and I couldn't help but linger on the way he transitions from bluster, ranting, and daring people to bring it, to talking about walking with the Prince of Peace. It's jarring and hard to believe, even though I've listened to it numerous times.
So, Diamond, Westgate, Wyndham, Marriott, Blue Green? Who am I leaving out here? I don't want to leave anybody out. Just let you guys know, you've been hassling my butt for 2 years behind the scenes, and we just made it public. Game on, boys. Game on. This is The Ramsey Show. We'll be back with you before you know it. In the meantime, remember, there's ultimately only one way to financial peace, and that's to walk daily with the Prince of Peace, Christ Jesus.
That excerpt from Dave encapsulates one reason I talk about him. He uses Jesus' name. My friend Dan Watt wrote an article about this recently, and he wrapped up his article with a quote from Dave Ramsey's book, EntreLeadership. Here are Dave's own words. I have a goal to get to the end of my life and have one of the great joys be not only winning at business, but how I won at business. None of us get to the end of our lives and think we should have done one more deal or made one more dollar. When your life draws to a close, you realize what is important, people and how you treated them. I'm not sure how to square those words with these ones he said about journalist Lisa Guerrero, who claimed to be injured while trying to get a statement from Dave.
You poor, stupid little girl. I think maybe the way you hurt your arm was when you got in bed with the timeshare people. That might have been when you hurt your arm. That's very possible. Something for you guys to think about out there.
Dave claims to be running his business based on Christian principles, and yet he seems to be fine with insinuating things of a sexual nature about a journalist who reported on things that reflected poorly on him. It feels like the opposite of walking daily with the Prince of Peace. Thanks for listening to the Untangled Faith podcast. You can find links to resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes. You can find those notes on your favorite podcast app or by going to untangledfaithpodcast.com and clicking on episodes. If you're on social media, I'd love to keep this conversation going over on Twitter or Instagram or through the Facebook page. I'm Untangled Faith on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm Faith Untangled on Twitter. The Untangled Faith podcast is hosted and edited by me, Amy Fritz. This podcast is made possible by the support of my Patreon community. A special thanks to producers Michelle Pionic, Phil and Susan Perdue, Pam Forsyth, and Shelley Taylor. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next week.